Hey everybody, welcome back to the Other Home channel. This is Eotitus speaking, and we're going to be taking the 9-axis political compass test. Why are we doing this? Because I'm about to do a bunch of political content or talk about the news, and I felt like before I really dug into that, I should probably give you guys an idea of where I stand, and what better way of doing that than some quick online quizzes that obviously are totally accurate and not at all a little bit silly in some ways. This one though I think is a little bit better than a lot of the others just because there's so many different values to look at here. If you want to pause the video and take a look, we've got federal versus unitary, democratic versus authoritarian, globalist versus isolationist, militarist versus pacifist, security versus freedom, equality versus markets, secular versus religious, progressive versus traditional, and assimilationist versus multiculturalist. So what we're going to do is take this test. We're going to take the short version because I value your time and my own. And this totally isn't the third time I've started this video because of various problems. So let's just jump into this. The way this works is that it'll give us a question or a statement, and then we have to either strongly agree, give a neutral, unsure answer, disagree, or strongly disagree. And then based off of that, we'll kind of have an idea of where I would fall in your political ideologies. So let's see. Law should be completely consistent within all regions of a nation. I'm gonna have to disagree with that because different geographical areas in a nation are going to have different necessities for their legal frameworks. That could be strictly because of the geography, so certain things could be safe and others they wouldn't be. You could be talking about cultural differences and what people value. I don't think laws need to be completely consistent within all regions of a nation. I don't even think that's a light disagree. I think that's a strong disagree, because if you think that they need to be completely consistent, then I think you're asking for problems there. Most bad things happen in the world are caused by us turning away from religion. Well, I'm going to take the us here with a grain of salt because it's mostly you, but if I were a participant in this, I would say most likely not. I don't think most bad things happen because turning away from religion. Considering that before modern time, it seems like you guys had a very iron grip on religion controlling the world, and there seemed to be a lot of bad things then. So I think going with this is a strong disagree. Religion does not belong in government. Well, obviously if you have a theocracy, then you're going to need religion in your government, but I'm guessing it's asking if I think that a religious, aspect needs to be in the government. While I don't have any religious tendencies myself, I think that it's good to have people from different perspectives as part of the government. Just as long as the government doesn't, what would be the best way of putting it? Like, show favoritism to one religion or the other. So at the same time though, I feel like as soon as you introduce religion to government, then that starts giving religions more power. And that's a little bit scary, to be honest. Because I personally think that a lot of religious thinking leads to some kind of, well, it's very general, so please don't apply this equally to all religious people and institutions, but I think it's very irrational, and putting religion in government kind of like validates it further and gives people a reason to be more irrational. So does religion does not belong in the government. I want to mostly agree on. I don't strongly agree on it, but I feel like religion doesn't really have a place other than the people that have religious beliefs should be able to take part in the government. But I don't think that really is the heart of what this is asking. I think this means like, should religion be enshrined in legislation or something like that? Should it not be, as in? So I'm going to agree. Children should be educated in religious values. Wow, this test really cares a lot about religion. I don't think should be. I don't think it's necessarily wrong to raise children with religious values, given that you you temper it with reasonable expectations. But I think that might be a lot to ask from certain religious institutions. I'm gonna take a light disagree on this one, because I don't think that you should completely censor out all religious views, but I don't see an inherent value in rearing a child with religious values, especially when some religions out there seem to have some very toxic views of the world, and raising children in it could stunt their intellectual and emotional growth. Nations should cooperate whenever it benefits them both. I feel like that's a strong agree. Nations cooperating whenever it benefits them both can be a bad thing for their populations if the people at the top are kind of the ones deciding if it benefits them both, because it could just be benefiting this like aristocratic class of people and hurting all the plebeians. But I think if we're talking in generalities here, or if we're not talking about kind of half-truths there with what counts as benefiting them both, then I would have to say strong agree. Taxes should be increased on the rich to provide for the poor. Increased from what they are now. I mean, being from outside of your system here, I know a lot about it, and I've even had to pay taxes, seeing as I've made some money over the internet in my time spending on it. So I do have a little bit of experience with that. But should it be increased on the rich to provide for the poor? I want to say a light agree on this. It's just that usually the way in which the taxes are implemented on the rich, and how those taxes are used to pay for the poor, are the contentious thing here. Because while I do think you could do this fine, the people in power don't seem to be able to. So I'm going to give a light agree to that. Democracy makes it too easy for a majority to further itself at the expense of minorities. I want to immediately agree with that, because I feel like that happens a lot. That's why you have to have something like the Bill of Rights or some other like check to the balance of power democracy can cause. Because that's true. Democracy is just looking for plurality or majority in order to make its decisions, which immediately could be something that's used as a bludgeon against minorities. So if you're looking at different forms of participation in your government, democracy seems all right, but you have to be able to honestly look at the drawbacks to it. And one of them is that a majority can exercise a lot of power over minorities. Makes it too easy though. Alone, yes, but if you have other checks on it. But I can make a light agree with that, because I think that's a factual understanding of the shortcomings of democracy. Illegal immigrants do not provide a benefit to the hosting country. I'm going to say no to that, because the only thing I think they really don't provide, just generally speaking, of course, because it's not going to be clearly all of them, is the income tax or certain kinds of taxes. Other than that, you have people showing up, they're providing their labor, they're spending money in the economy. As long as they assimilate into the society, then you're bulking up the culture. So I want to give a disagree to this. It could be a strong disagree though, because if the only thing you care about is taxation for these people, then you would have to do some amount of agreeing. But since I don't think that's like the sole defining benefit to a hosting country, I think there's so many other ways that illegal immigrants contribute to a country that I would have to disagree. I guess the only other thing I would really say that they're a detriment to is maybe security. Your average run-of-the-mill illegal immigrant is not going to be, a terrorist or something. But the lack of enforcement of the border and your naturalization laws mean that it's going to be easier for malicious actors to participate. So I think for that reason, I'm just going to do like a light disagree instead of a strong disagree, but it's on the border there. Capitalism is better than any existing alternative. Well, let's see. Existing alternatives to capitalism are hard, especially because capitalism does a very good job of incorporating other people and even their systems into it. For example, if you're talking about socialism, where workers own the means of production and democratize the workspace, you could still have that within the capitalist system. You can still have businesses that operate that way while living in a capitalist system. So it's very accommodating, like it doesn't seem to impose that. It's mostly just about the ownership of private capital. And as long as you have that and some kind of system to enforce property rights, it seems to allow a lot of other things to exist inside of it. So I try to be open to as many different ideas that you humans come up with, and I haven't seen one that I think I resonate with more than capitalism. It seems to be the best one. So I want to give a strong agree here. I'm just trying to think if there's anything that would move me away from it. Because I know there are problems with capitalism, just like we just talked with democracy. There's things like the accumulation of wealth becomes easier the more wealthy you are, so it kind of does this snowball thing. Obviously, there's limited resources, so when that happens, then you end up with some haves and some have-nots. But at least it seems like the people that are incapable of actually utilizing that capital in a way that benefits society end up not holding on to it for extreme lengths of time, compared to other systems where it seems that you end up with oligarchs that just hold on to it. Not to say that that's perfectly how it works, but I can't think of anything else that has better trade-offs than capitalism. Diplomacy only hurts nations. What? I don't really understand this, because I feel like diplomacy can hurt or help. Obviously, if you fail a diplomatic conversation or something, it can hurt your nation. Or you could decide on something diplomatically, but it ends up hurting you in the long run because of various factors. But for the most part, this is like saying talking only hurts nations, and I would have to disagree with that. I'd say strongly disagree with that, because I think there's obvious benefits to diplomacy. Maybe that's like a naive outlook, or there's something that I'm missing there, or maybe I have a misunderstanding of the definition of diplomacy, but I feel like there's some obvious benefits that can come out of it. The wealthy have far more than they need. Well, yeah, I think whenever you're wealthy, you live in excess of your needs. To some extent, there's an increase in your needs as you increase in wealth, simply to protect that wealth. So let's say in a completely just and meritocratic system where somebody has gained and accumulated an amount of wealth that is in excess of their needs, well, if anybody knows about that, then they're going to start trying to trick them, scam them, find ways to get that money off of them. And they need to expend some of that wealth in security and protections to keep other people from unjustly taking it from them. So a wealthy person could have more needs as far as securing their private property. But other than that, I feel like an increase in your wealth leads to people living more luxury, and that means they're living far more excessive than they need to. So I'm gonna have to agree with that. Not a strong agree, because I think there is some kind of proportionality there to how much more wealthy you get and the things you need to spend on to maintain that wealth and protect it. And even if you want to be as charitable as possible and give it away to as many people, you have to be careful not to be scammed out of it, and that takes time and research and money. So it just feeds into itself pretty well. People should think of themselves as citizens of their nation rather than their state. Can't you do both? If we're talking more or less, I feel like nation more than state. I do feel like there should be more importance put on the local level than on the national level, just because at the local level you like live, breathe, and see each other, which I think is way more cohesive. You like, whenever you see people talking online, they always bring in this huge bravado and their huge exorbitant personalities. But then a lot of them, once you sit them down face to face with someone else, they immediately temper their rhetoric to something more palatable. And that's because those face-to-face interactions, it's harder to like glomp all of the stereotypes of the others that you have on them. So I feel like people acting at a local level is a little bit better than at the state or national level. But since this is asking about nations and states, I would like to say state over nation, but I also think a national identity is very important too, like that hierarchy of authority. But I think if I'm going to be consistent and honest here, I think the state identity is more important than the nation identity. Because I think you should care more about the people immediately around you than those far away. Because if everybody did that, then most places would be a lot better. But if you concern yourself with everyone far away and leave everything around you messed up, then it makes it easier for everyone to pretend like it'll just get better if we keep the shoveling responsibility at a national level. So I'm going to take a slight disagree on this. But it's not by much. You know, I could have taken a neutral stance on that, but I'm trying to avoid that so I can get some more answers because we're doing the short quiz instead of the long quiz. We should respect those who have served in our military. Well, I don't have a lot of personal experience with wars and whatnot. I do know what it's like to be on constant alert for people to attack you and hunt you down. So if there's other people that have been in that situation compared to the rest of society that really hasn't, I feel like they deserve some amount of respect, especially in situations where they literally did defend the nation from an aggressor that was just trying to take their resources. I think people that put themselves in harm's way to protect other people should be respected for that. This obviously doesn't account for individual scumbags who did this and were probably awesome for doing so, but then let that respect go to their head or that power go to their head. But I don't think that's part of the question here. I think it's asking just on merit, respecting those that serve to protect and defend your country. So I would have to strongly agree with that because that's a big sacrifice to make. The general populace makes poor decisions. Oh God. I don't know about that because a part of me, obviously, the laugh kind of gives it away. I mean, it does seem like a lot of humans make some really shitty decisions, but at the same time, a lot of them make good. And I think the problem here is that, like, if you ask somebody who's a car mechanic how to, take care of their body and be healthy, it's probably going to be full of some pretty bad ideas of safety and health. But if you ask them, how to keep your car well maintained, they're of course going to give you like a 10,000 page essay on why people don't know how to take care of their cars and what they could do to do it better. So when you're talking about like generally making decisions, I think, as a mass, you can have a lot of very uninformed people making decisions on things that they're not informed on. Because if everyone has their own specialties, then that means the only people really qualified to talk on any subject is such a small segment of the population. And the rest of the population is almost completely dependent on their expertise in that field. and there's a lot of general mistrust of each other. So that leads people making some very uninformed choices. So the general populace makes poor decisions. I think I'm gonna have to take a light degree on. I think that's just like a statistical analysis of what the outcomes of general population decisions are. A military option should always be considered. In what context? Wait, what? I don't think it should always be considered. Like if we're talking about like I can't even think of anything. Well, obviously if you need to like protect some territory or, you know, intervene in some way in an aggressive action, then yeah, the military should be considered. I know there's like natural disasters and stuff, and I know the National Guard, at least for America, gets called in on that a lot. So if that's a military option, sure, that should be considered. But if you're talking about like, you know, I'm trying to think of a very puerile piece of legislation, like, oh, everyone's talking about like the banning of books and stuff. If a school decides to remove a book from a piece of curriculum, should the military option be considered? No. If we're talking about, hey, should we need to enforce some kind of traffic law in this area because there's a lot of high-speed accidents that happen here. Should you consider the military for it? Like, those are some extreme examples of trying to use the military, but this is kind of extremely vague. So I'm just going to take a light disagree with that because I don't think it should always be considered. But there's obviously times that you need to consider a military option. It is necessary for the government to intervene in the economy to protect consumers. Well, sometimes I think that is true. I don't think that's an all the time true situation, but I think there are times when other governments can interfere with your economy in a way that hurts your consumers. So a government intervening in their intervention, him, me, is sometimes going to be necessary. Otherwise, you end up with one government being able to completely take advantage of another because of their unwillingness to intervene in the economy. The immediate thing that I want to caveat that with is, if you have enough conscious consumers in your markets, then I don't think the government would need to intervene, because if people understood how they were being manipulated by outside agents, and they were to address those by changing their consumption habits, then you wouldn't need to have a government intervene. It wouldn't be a necessity. So part of me wants to say disagree, because it's not a necessity if you have a knowledgeable population. But we just talked about how the general population makes poor decisions because people are specialized in their fields, and not everybody's going to understand what is poor consumption behaviors when being manipulated by outside agents. So I'm going to say a light agree there. Genetic modification should be used rarely, if ever. I think that has more to do with modern issues with it. I'm going to take a drink real fast. Excuse me. Because I feel like the apprehensions people have about genetic modification just comes from it being a relatively new field, and also it's got spooky implications to it, where, like, you know, 100 years ago there wasn't a lot of genetic modification because I don't even think the double helix DNA strand was found yet. But then shortly after that, you know, you started having the agricultural boom where genetically modified crops started popping up everywhere, and really making it so that a very small percentage of the population had to participate in agriculture in order for the entire population to be fed. So I'm going to have to take a strong disagree on this, because I feel like most of your modern world wouldn't be as comfortable as it is without having genetic modification. And the word has just become kind of a scary boogeyman. And the more you guys get along with it, I think the easier it's going to be to see its necessity. So I'm going to strongly disagree with that. It should be used more often. National cultures are important to protect. I'm not sure about that one. Because on one hand, yeah, I understand the importance of a national culture to people. It's like your identity, it's your history, your heritage, your ancestry. All of that stuff is wrapped up in a national culture. And wanting to protect that and preserve that is pretty nice. It's like, you know, staring out on a scenery with a blanket of snow on it. You just wish it would stay that way, and then seeing some things like run across it, or like maybe some cars or something, and leaving tire tracks. So like, oh no, it's ruined. But at the same time, the cultures are only the way they are now because of all the transformations they've gone over the years. Like, if you look at any nation right now, 400 years ago is going to be drastically different from the one now. And that's because it builds off one another. Especially whenever you start getting this like cross-pollination between nations, and you get refugees from one place and they come over, migrants and everything like that. Wars are fought, new territories are claimed, things are absorbed, nations split apart. Like, all of these changes influence those cultures. So it might feel nice to preserve it right now, but in the long run, it's probably going to be one of your avoidance of change is going to be something that influences that culture, or the acceptance of change will influence that culture. So do I think it's important to protect? I don't think consciously and actively. I think there are some things that it's okay to protect, but in general, I'm going to disagree with that. It's a good idea to test a policy in one state rather than implementing it nationwide right away. Well, my immediate thought is strongly agree, because I feel like that's kind of like the scientific approach to anything, is starting with like a scaled down version of something and seeing how it works, and then upping the scale and then testing that, and then upping the scale and testing that. I think you do that with all forms of engineering. You should be doing that with the engineering of policy, I feel like. So I'm going to take a strong agree with that. A nation must obey its leadership without question. Ooh, my immediate thought is a strong disagree with that. I feel like trusting a person in authority over you is immediately something I'm skeptical of. Anyone who's in a position of authority is going to be enticed to exploit it for personal benefit. That just seems to be the way it is. Anyone who has power has the ability to use that power in ways that harm other people. And so you have to almost always be skeptical of their motivations and have some kind of counterbalance to whatever power they have so that you can keep them in check. So a nation must obey its leadership without question. Gonna take a strong disagree on that. Religious clothing should be banned from public. No. Like, I understand people might not like certain religious views, but I kind of have it's not a soft spot. I don't want to call it a hard spot, but like, censorship kind of gets me mad. Because not only are you like removing somebody's ability to express something, you're removing my ability to hear them out or to understand their perspective by removing it from the public eye. So yeah, I feel like if somebody has some religious clothing, they should be able to wear it, just as long as they're not forcing it on other people or the government is mandating that you dress yourself in religious attire. So we're going to have to take a strong disagree on that one. Some freedom must be given up in order to keep people safe. Oh, well, immediately what comes to mind is that like Ben Franklin quote of people that give up freedom for security will get neither and deserve neither, or something like that. That said, that's kind of a very absolute statement. Because, you know, there is some amount of freedom that has to be given up to keep people safe. Like, you can't have the freedom to just do extrajudicial murders on people because you want to enact some kind of vigilante justice. Because as soon as you have that, people are not going to be safe from people exercising that that justice on them, especially if people have very strong disagreements over what would be justice in those situations. So some freedom must be given up in order to keep people safe. I would have to agree with that. Nations fighting among each other gets in the way of progress. Not necessarily. Because if it's a bunch of nations that want progress and some nations that want to get in the way of it, you might have to fight to get the progress you want. If it's talking about in general, I don't think so, because it just depends on what you're fighting over. The general idea of fighting getting in the way of progress, maybe, because you're putting resources towards annihilating one another. You're going to be displacing people and causing new problems that you have to solve then. So fighting can get in the way of progress, but that dip in, like if you were looking at progress as something that you put productivity towards in order to increase it, that increase might be getting stifled by some nation getting in the way, and others will need to fight it so that you can get that growth even faster. So I want to say I agree, because, you know, immediately it could be stopping it, but I think there's an understanding that an exception would be if a nation is prohibiting others' progress and they need to fight them to ensure that they can get the progress they want. But in general, I agree. The government should not regulate the economy at all. I think that goes back to the previous statement about, like, government intervention in the economy. While I think it's possible for a group of people to be conscious consumers and avoid the pitfalls that come with free markets and stuff, not everybody is an expert. Not everybody is going to have the knowledge necessary to make well-informed decisions in the economy. And because of that, you basically need to have experts intervening and doing stuff. So should not regulate the economy at all? I would have to disagree. I think there should be some amount of intervention there on behalf of other people. Anybody who wants to enter the country should be able to. Sure. I mean, as long as the requirements for naturalization aren't dependent on factors you can never overcome, then sure. I think if it were me personally, I think just having a unified language and an understanding of like civic requirements is basically all you need to participate in the country. So having a common language makes sure that everybody can easily participate in it. Assimilation would be better. Just having a common language for your country helps it be more cohesive. And then after that, you just basically need to understand how the legal structure works so you stay out of jail and don't have a reasonable expectation to not know the laws. Because if the laws are written in that universal language and you've already been naturalized, you should know what they are. So I think I'd go with a strong agree on that. Anybody enter the country. I guess if I'm looking at this from bad agents though, if you have people that are traitors to your country or actively want to wish harm on it or have been violent to it in the past, and they've been like exiled from the country, should they be able to enter the country? No. No, I think the exceptions there are people that have been prohibited because of their actions taken against the country should not be able to enter the country, at least until those issues are resolved in some way. So we're going to give that, I'm going to give it a strong agree, because I think those exemptions are very specific and out there, like crimes against a country. Because even if you have like two countries that go to war, and then in the aftermath, you might have some people that want to move from the aggressive country to the one that was sieged. I don't think you should hold those people accountable for it, even if they were like participating in the military action, because people's opinions and thoughts on countries change after you're out of war. Not always and not instantly, but it does happen. So I'll take a strong agree there. Whistleblowers should be strongly protected. Well, yeah, my immediate thoughts are yes. Because somebody who has insider information and wants the general public to know that something bad is going on under their noses, those people should be protected because what they're doing is very brave. And if there's any kind of blowback on them, that would be terrible because they're trying to do a service to basically all mankind by sticking up for the people that don't know. So I feel a strong agree there. Only those who served in the military should be able to gain power in the government. I'm gonna have to take a strong disagree on that as well. I understand the importance of giving the, I think if we're going by like Star Trek Troopers standards, the right to franchise being something only given out to people that have shown their willingness to sacrifice themselves for the country, so that you don't have people in power that are selfish. You know, these are people that are willing to sacrifice themselves for the good of the country. So I kind of understand that perspective, but at the same time, I feel like there is a necessity to have experts in fields that required lifetime commitments to them, where you didn't have military time. That can be anything from like a legal position like lawyers to academic like scholars, and even tradesmen and engineers, scientists, things like that. Having those people in power helps give a perspective to policy decision, because military people could understandably act selflessly and with the best intentions of the nation in mind, but that doesn't mean that they have the expertise to implement legislation that does that. So I think you need to have other people there. So we're going to take a strong disagree on that. Only extremely talented immigrants, if that, should be permitted to enter the country. I understand this position because I know that what you want to do with immigrants is have some really high-skilled people come in, but also having low-skill labor come into the country helps lower the cost of living, and that can help balance out inflation and do a lot of other benefits for your country. So I don't think only extremely talented immigrants should be permitted to enter the country. I think there is some benefits to having a mixed bag of it. A bunch of low-skilled labor and a bunch of high-skilled labor coming in at the same time would be preferable to just one or the other. So I'm going to take a strong disagree on that. We're at 29 out of 45, only 16 away. Local governments can understand their citizens better than the national government could. I want to take a strong agree on that, because I feel like local governments are made up, of course, of local people, and local people are going to know their locale better than those at the national level. At the same time, though, people who have worked at the national level are going to know more about the workings of the nation and its place in the international community more than governments at a local level. So you can't just say that the only important thing is the local level, because then you're disregarding the entire upper part of the hierarchy. But with this, I can agree. Local governments can understand their citizens better than the national government, because it is a smaller scope and made up of those very people. When you're talking about a national government, you're going to have people in one area making decisions for people in another without ever really understanding them. So we're going to take a strong agree on that one. The more people asked, the better chance there is of reaching the best decision. Not necessarily, because that kind of falls back on what I said about the general population. There's a lot of specialization in human society, where people are very good at a small handful of things. So if you ask a lot of people in a field about something, then there'll be a better chance of reaching a decision. But if you ask a lot of people in the general population, then the voices of the expert are going to be drowned out by the voices of the uninformed. And that's especially strong whenever you incorporate like the Dunning-Kruger effect into it, where people with the slightest amount of expertise in a subject think they are super confident in their ability to talk about it, but they aren't, which seems to happen a lot. So I would have to take a slight disagree with that. The more people ask, the better chance there is of reaching the best decision. I would say disagree, because I think you're also getting a lot of people that are outside their field of knowledge giving input into something they don't really understand. Human-caused climate change is currently one of the greatest threats to our way of life. We're going to take R with a grain of salt since, I'm not there, but if I were there, I think it is something to worry about. Obviously the impact on the ecosystem, we talked about this in another video, but like just changing the global temperature by 0.5 degree doesn't seem that bad, because most people are like, well, it changes 20 degrees between morning and night for me and there's no big deal. What's a 0.5 degree change in global temperature? The problem is that there's a lot of chemistry in the environment, and when you talk about a 0.5 degree change, you're talking about a huge impact, because you're talking about much more than just an individual person. The example I think I gave last time was the amount of oxygen that can be saturated in water based off of the temperature, which obviously affects how much oxygen fish and other bio-life marine life can use in the water. It's going to massively impact a lot of their behaviors and the places that they live and they feed. I think it also affects the salinity of the water, the salt content of water, and also how much it can absorb greenhouse gases, because water, just like how it absorbs oxygen, can also absorb the other carbon emissions. So changing the global temperature by 0.5 degree can cause a very large scale change in the way that the chemistry of the earth works. So I think it is a very large threat to your way of life. The only thing I would temper that with is you guys are very adaptive, so even if there was a huge ecological fallout, I wouldn't be surprised if your use of technology would allow you to survive it with relative comfort. Because I think you guys are really good at adapting. But I think that does change your way of life. So if we're talking about threats to your way of life, I would have to say it is one of the biggest threats. So we're going to take, I want to say a strong agree, simply because I do think it's one of the greatest threats that you currently are facing. But it's hard to focus on that when there's so many other things going on in the world, and to actually impact this, you would have to do a lot. But I guess that's more like what the cure would be, more than recognizing the harm. So strong agree here. Automation overall is extremely good for society. Ooh, that's a tough one. We'll take a drink before this. Okay, so automation is good in that it raises productivity for a person. If you have like 40 people on an assembly line putting together parts to something, and you can replace them all with robots and have like maybe 6 engineers that just maintain the robots, then obviously that's going to be very productive. The problem is the displacement of labor. Now you have people that were trained in one profession, and now that's obsolete and they need to be retrained or start over as low-skilled labor in a different industry. And that has negative consequences to it. However, I think if you're able to adequately address that displacement, then there isn't really a negative with automation. I think overall is extremely good for society is a fair statement to make that I would strongly agree with. The problem is that you just need to have some way of retraining people who are now considered obsolete because of this innovation. But I feel like that's not automation's fault. That's more of a fault of society in general. So, if another part of your society is able to take on this issue, then no problem. You got it. We should put effort into getting a person on Mars in the near future. Again, we is a grain of salt here, but do I think you guys should put more effort into getting a person on Mars in the near future? I feel like so. It's not a strong agree. I don't think that's like a super important thing, but I think the process of exploration and what is it, like being on the frontier, pushing out into unexplored territory. I know that you've put rovers on Mars and unmanned drones and stuff, but trying to push humanity outside of their comfort zone into doing new things seems to get you guys to do some really cool stuff. So trying to get a person on Mars and trying to overcome the challenges of doing that, I think would help you guys get spurred along a lot further in your hunt for more technology. So I would agree with that. It's not a strong agree because there's also other ways to get that motivation. Getting a person on Mars isn't like tantamount, but it's something good to strive for, I think. Border protection is important. Yes, because part of being a country is enforcing your territory so that the people that live within it can... Excuse me, I didn't know the juice would make me gassy. Because, you know, protecting your citizens and making sure that they can live comfortably within your territory without fear of an outside nation attacking or hostily capturing and ransacking their land is an important part of being a country, I think. As long as you have a border, you should enforce it to protect your people. Obviously, there's going to be different ideas about what is correct border protections and what is the best way to go about enforcing it and who and what you should exempt from being able to cross that border. I think we already kind of laid out how I feel about that part, but I do think protecting it is important. I'm going to take a strong agree on that. Nations should not maintain a military. I'm going to have to take a strong disagree on that. It's obviously a bit of an arms race issue, where when one country builds up their military, it makes them a threat to others and forces them to raise a military. But any nation that doesn't have a military, next to one that does, instantly loses. You don't have a nation then because another nation just runs you over. So you have to have some amount of ability to protect your citizenry, otherwise you can't really be a nation. Not because of some technical definition or something like that, but just because in practicality, you're just going to be annexed. You're just going to be taken over. So you won't be a nation then anyway. Strong disagree. Having independent nations with the risk of global conflict creates a large threat to humanity as a whole. Kind of. In one way I see that because yeah, whenever you have a bunch of independent agents, they can't act selfishly and without regard to the safety and health of the others, or as the collective as a whole, and make make decisions that basically negatively impact the entire system. That said, I think it's also bad to be completely centralized as well. It comes back down to like that federal versus state level thing, where I understand having things at a federal level, things at a state level, things at a county level, and then at a local level. Kind of like a telescoping your legislation from top to bottom and bottom to top that way allows you to have more freedom of association in the places that you want. So having independent nations allows for that kind of telescoping, whereas if it was like a one world government and each region had to adhere to this one specific government, all it would take is that one specific government to make a really big mistake or misstep in their execution, or I don't know, just making a terrible policy decision, and that would also be a threat to humanity as a whole. They could do something that completely fundamentally ruins society, and because everyone put all their eggs in one basket, well, now you're all dead. Instead of just having one country make that terrible decision and get fucked up over it, everyone has to deal with it. So I'm going to take a light disagree, because I do know that having independent nations does invite this risk of global conflict. But at the same time, having a one world government is also a large threat to humanity as a whole for slightly different reasons. But yes, this can be a huge problem. So You know, either way, I could take a light agree or a light disagree on this, depending on how I want to phrase it. Having independent nations with the risk of global conflict creates a large threat to humanity as a whole. Well, I have to agree with this statement. That is a reality of having independent nations. That's part of it. So trying to disagree with that just seems like weaseling, and I was trying to weasel my way out of having to agree with it. The national government can't understand what the people need. Well, that's a lot different than what they said before about local governments just being better at understanding their people. National government can't understand what the people need. I'm gonna have to disagree with, because I think there are definitely ways to understand that at a national level. The very existence of the state is a threat to our liberty. Don't think so. Again, this kind of talks about the subjects of border protection that we were discussing, where in order to have people living freely, that freedom has to be with a little bit of expense to security. Because if you don't have a way to protect yourself from an invading army, then you're not going to be free. And then their state will overpower your non-state and put you into a state of very lacking liberty, let's say that. If it's an extremely authoritarian government and they just come in and subjugate you, well, it doesn't matter that you didn't have the threat of a state looming over you. So I'm gonna have to take a strong disagree on this one. Police should be regulated more. This is probably a very American-centric quiz, so assuming that we're talking about American policing, I would say yes. Should be regulated more. I think when people think of regulation, they're talking about bureaucratically, but I'm going to give them a little leeway here and say that I think you can also regulate from below. You could have community councils and stuff like that that can review police conduct in order to determine if they acted within the law or if they should be held accountable for it or punished or something like that. Saying they should be more regulated, they're leaving it very open for me, so I want to say a strong agree, because I don't think there's a problem necessarily with that. It's just going to be about how you do it. We should be more accepting to other cultures. Well, again, the we here is a little bit weird, but I think I've been pretty accepting of your cultures. I try to be very understanding, and even if I don't agree with it, I try to be tolerant of it. However, you know, not all cultures deserve that respect. There are some cultures that are very toxic. There's no other way of really putting it, and I don't think they deserve to have acceptance for it. So should we be more accepting to other countries? Other cultures? I would say a light agree there, because there are times when you need to temper that that tolerance. Religion should be removed from everything in our government. Again, I feel like as soon as the government shows favoritism to a religion, then you're going to end up with problems, because then people that don't belong to that religion, or of course if they're part of a competing religion, are going to have huge problems with it. However, having representation of religious people in your government doesn't seem that bad to me, just as long as there isn't a favoritism there. So religion should be removed from everything in our government. I want to say a light disagree there, because there is a place for it. It just needs to not be favoritized. You just shouldn't be able to give like necessarily favoritism, and I've said the same thing like 3 times, but I'm trying to think of a different way of putting it. Just as long as, you know, religion doesn't trump other things, having the perspective of a religious person influencing policy seems fine. But it should not be part of the legislation. You should not be legislating religion. So I think that really depends on what we're talking about religion being removed from. Because I can take a light agree here if it's like, you know, religion shouldn't be a part of pieces of legislation. Sure, yeah, agree, I don't want it in there. But religion should be removed from everything, so we shouldn't have politicians that belong to a religious group. Well, that's a different story. But I think what they're saying might have more to do with legislation than it does with representation. So I'm going to take a light agree on that. People should have the power to choose their leaders. Well, I feel like that's a strong agree there. People should have the power to choose their leaders. We did talk about how people have their specialties. There's things that they know and that they're good at. And when you're choosing a leader, if they have opinions that you disagree on because you specifically have a specialty and they seem to be saying things that run contrary to your knowledge in those fields, then that sucks. And obviously the majority of people aren't going to know that they're misinformed on that topic, whereas you're particularly informed on the topic. But if we're saying in general, the people having control over their leader is a check to the balance of authority in general. People with authority are very likely to abuse that authority, and trying to default to a higher authority just makes that problem even worse. Defaulting lower on the hierarchy scale for the balance there and letting the people decide who gets the power is a way to make sure that it's less abusive than it otherwise could be. So I want to say strong agree. We must go back to a basic way of life without modern conveniences. Again, say you guys must go back to a basic way of life without modern conveniences. No, I don't think so. I do think having a perspective informed by a time when you didn't have modern conveniences would be helpful for making better decisions in the modern day. But I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a must go back thing. I think it would just help with perspective to understand that, the way things used to be were that way because of a lack of these conveniences, and having that historical perspective would probably give you more nuanced views on how the world is now. So strong disagree there. Even when protesting an authoritarian government, violence is not acceptable. Ooh. Ooh, hoo, hoo. My immediate reaction is to agree with that. Because I feel like violence often ends up harming your movement. Because the problem people mostly have with authoritarian governments, and my understanding, is basically that they use coercive force to get what they want. And if your response to that is to also use coercive force, then it makes you seem unprincipled. Now, granted, if the authoritarian government is like running through the streets, pulling people out and shooting them in the head for being dissidents, then yeah, violence is going to be acceptable. But I think at that point you're beyond protesting and you're kind of now in civil war or revolt. But as long as you're in the protesting stage of things, when you're protesting, I don't think you should be violent. I think it undermines the value that you have in doing a protest if you start justifying violence in it. But I just want to say, while making that comment, that yes, there are times when you need to escalate to violence. But at that point, I think you're giving up on it being a protest. Violence is not acceptable. Strong agree. It is very important to maintain law and order. Well, yes, because you want stability in your society. If you don't maintain law and order, then basically the rules are up in the air and people don't know what's right or wrong, and then you end up having lots of vigilantism, people acting on their own, extrajudicial killings. It just seems like things get out of hand. So is it important to maintain law and order? A strong agree. So let's see what we got here. Okay, there they go. So I score very high on the federal side of things and not on the unitary. Democracy, I'm pretty neutral on compared democracy and authority. That's almost right in the middle there. Globalist, I am way more globalist than I am isolationist. So got that going for us, I guess. Neutral, between military and pacifist, probably just nuanced. Neutral on security versus freedom. Okay. Moderate equality. I care slightly more about equality than markets. Moderate secular. Okay. I think this is just my respect of people's This 35% is me respecting religious beliefs, even though I don't hold them. Fanatic progressive. Ooh, fanatically progressive. It was so much progressive, I didn't even get a percent over here. I didn't get my 5. And multiculturalist, assimilationist versus multiculturalist. I'm more there. Closest match, progressivism. Please note this does not factor the democratic authoritarian, globalist isolationist, equality markets, and progressive traditional axis. Well, that's like 4 of them. That's half of it, right? It's a 9 axis. And you're not taking in 1, 2, 3, 4 of the axes for this? Okay. Whatever. But yeah, that's apparently where I sit. I'm a closest match to progressivism. Well, that took about an hour. I didn't expect 45 minutes of political axes being that way. We could take a little bit of time to look back at what each of those mean. Back. Based off 8 values. Okay, here we go. Those with higher equality scores believe the economy should distribute value evenly among the populace. Can I go back to my results? Okay, so I think it just shows that there. So let's see the federal. Oh. Okay, so those are ones that don't show up on here. Oh, nation versus globe. Authority versus democracy, was that one? No. Okay, so I went more with globe than nation. So those with higher globe scores are cosmopolitan and globalists. They often believe in a peaceful foreign policy, emphasizing diplomacy, cooperation, integration, and at high values, a world government. Well, I feel like I kind of specifically talked that part down, but you know, they can't get everything right. That's why these tests are very generalized. What other ones? Equality in markets. Okay, so I went more with equality. Those with higher equality scores believe the economy should distribute value evenly among the populace. They tend to support progressive tax codes, social programs, and at high values, socialism. Okay, so despite me saying that I liked capitalism the most, I still ended up on that side of things. Moderate versus secular, that was another one. Liberty, authority, tradition, and progress. I was kind of neutral on the liberty versus authority, if that's what that is. Oh, maybe democracy versus authority. Well, I was still neutral there too, so whatever. And tradition versus progress, and I was heavy on the progress side here. Those with higher progress scores believe in social change and rationality, though not always. They are usually secular or atheists and support environmental action and scientific or technological research. All right. So in the future, whenever you see me talking about political ideas, just keep in mind that this is what this political test had to say about what my beliefs are. I think I gave some pretty good rationale to it. It does make it hard on some of those questions to give a concrete answer on the agree or disagree side, because it's easy to rationalize ways that you could be wrong on either side of it, or right on either side of it, of course. So, you know, grain of salt there, because a lot of this could change if I had just slightly changed my answers based off of what the question was asking. But I think we did a good job at that. So if you like this content and you're looking forward to me talking about politics in the future, give this a like and subscribe to see more of it. If you wanted to take this test yourself, come up here and give a link to your results, either like reply to me on Twitter or something like that, and talk about what you thought about my answers, and I'll respond to you. And until next time, take care of yourself and take care of those around you. Bye-bye.